This session discusses Rosenshine's principles of instruction. First, we start with a PowerPoint and some basic information, and then we go over to Tom Sherrington, who has done some videos to explain further with some activities to complete. Thank you. To begin with, I'd like to tell you a little bit of history about Baruch Rosenshine and his research. In 1986, Rosenshine published a document detailing 6 main ideas. In 2010, he wrote a series of pamphlets discussing the research that he had carried out between 1986 and 2010. This is where he wrote about the 17 instructional procedures. From 2010 to 2012, he continued his research and, in 2012, released a paper in the American Educator where he has condensed the 17 procedures into the 10 principles of instruction. The final segment on the flowchart mentions 4 strands. Tom Sherrington, who has written the book Rosenshine's Principles in Action, has condensed the principles further into 4 strands. Today, we will briefly look at the 10 principles organised into the 4 strands for ease. Today, I'll be using this book to explain Rosenshine's ideas. If anyone would like to have a copy, we do have some available that you can sign out to read. Here is a simple picture of a tree with roots. Sherrington is basically saying that Rosenshine's principles are, well, they are the roots of education. They are the very bare bones, the roots of a tree that are needed to make the tree grow, flourish, and sustain itself. So where did Baruch Rosenshine collate his evidence from? He has worked over the years with a close team researching how our brains use and acquire new knowledge and new information. Together with his team, they have observed master teachers. This term will be discussed and critiqued as we discover more about Rosenshine's principles. From these observations, he has tested the reliability and effectiveness of using scaffolding and other cognitive supports when learning a new cognitive activity or method. I'd now like to ask you to read the paper Principles of Instruction. You can find it attached at the end of this PowerPoint. I'm sure that some of you are just thinking that the principles are just common sense. They are what we've always done, right? I'm sure they are. The point is that we want these principles to be automatic, become fluent, so that this is not saved for when someone is in our classes observing that these behaviours and principles are fluent and automatic. It becomes a norm for us and for our children. This brings us nicely onto schemata. Ollie C. represents schemata here in his diagram. A schema could be defined as a set of linked mental representations of the world, which we use both to understand and to respond to situations. The assumption is that we store these mental representations and apply them when needed. For example, a person might have a schema about buying a meal in a restaurant. The schema is a stored form of pattern of behaviour, which includes looking at a menu, ordering food, eating it, and paying the bill. This is an example of a type of schema called a script. Whenever they are in a restaurant, they retrieve the schema from memory and apply it to the situation. A 2-year-old child sees a man who is bald on top of his head and has long frizzy hair on the sides. To his father's horror, the toddler shouts, "Clown, clown!" In the clown incident, the boy's father explained to his son that the man was not a clown, and that even though his hair was like a clown's, he wasn't wearing a funny costume and wasn't doing silly things to make people laugh. With this new knowledge, the boy was able to change his schema of clown and make this idea fit better to a standard concept of clown. New knowledge is only stored if we can connect it to knowledge that we already have. Therefore, prior knowledge, background knowledge, is a huge, majorly important factor in our ability to learn and retain new information. I really like this quote from Sherrington, and I feel that it's really important for us to remember. If a schema contains incorrect information, a misconception, or an incomplete model of how a process works, we can't simply overwrite it. A more primitive schema can return to dominate unless we unpick and fully relearn a correct schema. Think of a foreign language. I worked in Frankfurt for 9 years. I spoke some German almost every day. I was surrounded by German, heard it everywhere I went, had German-speaking friends, watched the German news, etc. It was a norm for me, and although I was absolutely not fluent, I had a good understanding. When I used to come home to England for holidays and people spoke to me, in my head, I would be automatically translating the conversation into German. Then I came home. I've been home now for around 5 years. I haven't heard any German, haven't spoken any German. My environment and influences around me have changed. Honestly, I can say that I would probably struggle to have an understandable conversation in German. I haven't practiced or retrieved the information enough. My environment has changed. The schema has shifted, and any fluency or automaticity has diminished. This clearly is not what we want when teaching our children. We want the knowledge to be retrieved, to become fluent and automatic. As we talked about previously, the more automatic a notion becomes, the less chance of cognitive overload. This leads us nicely onto the analogy of learning to ride a bike. Some children start to learn to ride a bike on a balance bike. Then they progress onto a bike with stabilizers, where pushing is needed to turn the pedals. Then they progress onto a fully grown bike, no support given. To become an expert bike rider, practice is needed. It needs someone to run up and down and up and down and up and down the street, holding the saddle, providing support until the rider has the balance and the push of the pedals coordinated and can finally ride independently. They have changed from novice to expert. This would not have been able to happen without repeated practice, over and over again. So, we know that a schema, a mental representation of how things occur and happen, needs to have a secure level of prior knowledge and practice to be successful. Imagine these heads are the children in your class. Imagine all the kinds of schemata that happen every minute of every day in your class. Every single child in the class will be processing the information in a different way, depending on their prior or background secondary knowledge, how much attention they are giving to the new knowledge being introduced, or their capacity to self-regulate and to be able to organise the new information. Imagine the child in your class who has little prior knowledge of the new information being introduced, who misunderstands the vocabulary taught, or who understands it as an alternative meaning, which links to a schema that basically has nothing to do with the new learning. It may link to some kind of food, for example, which then leads to the child thinking about tea. What will I have tonight for tea? You may be talking about the tea in Sri Lanka. They are thinking about their tea at home. Maybe pizza? Maybe with pineapple? Who knows? The point is that through Rosenshine's principles, we, as teachers, will help the children to select, organise and integrate their new knowledge by using and confirming the correct prior knowledge, self-regulation and the organising of information. Rosenshine in 2012 stated that the most effective teachers ensured that students efficiently acquired, rehearsed and connected knowledge. Many went on to hands-on activities, but always after, not before, the basic material was learned. Basically, Rosenshine feels that direct instruction is the most effective way to employ his principles for the majority of students. Learn basic material, then hands-on activities. Just a quick recap of the flowchart directing us through the overview. We have talked about the background behind the principles. Now we will have a quick delve into the principles, but please remember that this is an overview, not in-depth. Here are the 10 principles. Please just take time to have a quick read through. Ollie Cav has produced some great simple PowerPoint slides that explain each of the 4 strands really clearly. The first one, sequencing concepts and modelling, so using small steps, providing models and scaffolds. A perfect example is Romana having a skateboarding lesson, learning a new skill through small steps, concrete modelling, and verbal cues and prompts. We will see how Romana gets on in a few minutes. Questioning, asking questions, but also checking for understanding, avoiding the question, okay, so is everybody okay? Everybody understand? Everybody know what to do? Rosenshine suggests some alternatives that I have added to the slides here, and Tom Sherrington will be providing a video that explains this further. Stages of practice, guiding practice, modelling scaffolding, and then reducing the amount of scaffolding so that the child becomes more confident. Think of the learning to ride a bike analogy. Obtaining a high success rate, basically a student success rate of around 80% of the class, shows that the students are learning yet being challenged. And lastly, independent practice. Scaffolding has been reduced, and so the child has the opportunity to practice, and retrieve information. And here is a real-life example of how guiding practice, obtaining a high success rate and then resulting in independent practice can happen. Look carefully at how the instructor guides Romana by telling her to move her back foot to the tail of the board. Not forgetting the importance of reviewing the material on a daily basis and a weekly and monthly basis. Think of me and my German and how to avoid scenarios like this. Scheduled reviewing, practice and retrieval is needed to retain the new learning to become automatic and fluent. Automaticity and fluency through the practicing and retrieval can be achieved through the 6 strategies for effective learning from the learning scientists. These absolutely fit hand in hand with Rosenshine's principles. On the next few pages, you will see video extracts from Tom Sherrington, and he has also produced some handouts with some quizzes. You will also find attached the 17 principles of instruction.